Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg. I'm Reverend Meg Biddle, and I currently serve as the National Coordinator for Ministry Life and the American Baptist Personnel Services. And I am at the Leadership and Mission Building, the LAM, which is in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Um, I'm ordained ABC clergy, and welcome to the show. So today I have my very first chaplain. You're my first chaplain, Jimmy. I have Jimmy Collins, who's chaplain of or at our hospice of South Central Indiana. And welcome. Thank you for being here.
The invitation.
And full disclosure, Jimmy's from Indiana. I'm originally from Indiana. I guess are you sometimes at Columbus Regional? Have you
No, we work completely separately.
You're completely separate.
Office is across the street. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll get to that then. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is what happens. I have a little bit of ADD and I get excited about my guest and I want to go into everything and sorry. So, Jimmy, for thank you for being here, and for those who don't know you, why don't you do a little bit of introduction, tell people who you are, what you do, how you serve, that kind of thing.
Okay. I am nowhere close to where I thought I was going to be, but that's how the best ministry always seems to happen. I grew up on the Alabama-Tennessee line, not far from the Rocket on Interstate 65, which sadly apparently is a giant rust bucket now and will be coming down this year. Um, my father was a Baptist pastor on the Tennessee side of the line. Had to retire young because of his health. Um, we had excellent support from multiple area churches while we were fighting the disability process and struggling to make ends meet. Um, so I was, toward my last year of high school when I started to feel that push for ministry. And in my mind, Daddy was a bivocational pastor. He was also an auto mechanic. In my mind, that was where I was going to end up. I was going to be a school teacher, pastor a church on the weekends, stay close to home because that's what everybody did. God said, nope. And thanks to some input from campus ministries and campus ministry sponsors, um, decided to move into something more full-time, still leaning toward teaching at that point. Ended up at Southern Seminary in Louisville in 1989. That's where I met Missy, my wife of 31 and a half years. It's getting to where I have to do the math.
That's okay. I get it. But you got to get that part right.
But those were some tumultuous years at Southern. I was the last class under the previous administration. Um, and that's when the door opened to jump the river, become American Baptist. I had to give up the teaching dream. Ended up in a cornfield in Clay County, Indiana, not far from Terre Haute, um, pastoring a little church that had a troubled past, but it was one of the rare ones where it mostly wasn't their fault. You could actually track 30 years of pastors doing stupid things. This was in the days before the ethics statement that we're asked to sign as part of the ordination recognition process. So we actually helped bring some stability there. Spent 12 years in Greencastle as the kitchen sink associate pastor there. They ran out of money as church got smaller and smaller. That makes it sound worse than it is. It's not that small, but they were staffed for the days when they were 200 and 300.
Yeah.
IBM pulled out of town, took a lot of leadership, so they were down to 100, 150. So that's when I ended up in Columbus, which is why Meg's excited. Got me down down in this part of the state.
Yeah.
That church did not end well. It was a bit of a mismatch, and I knew that going in. But part of what I'm hoping I can get across here today is there is a life after that.
Yeah, there is.
So I wound up, and we found her for a couple of years, took some part-time gigs with a funeral home in town, did youth work with a local Lutheran church that has been very supportive. The hospice gig literally fell in my lap. It was a random email from an area pastor saying, hey, we're looking for somebody part-time to take weeknights on call. And it was not in my training. It was not on my radar at all. I mean, I had obviously lots of experience with death and being as a minister, as a pastor. So I thought, we can do that on call weeknights, and won't be that bad. And then fell in love with the work, discovered that my sensibilities had aligned pretty well with that form of ministry, and it segued into part-time and then full-time. Now I am assigned to the Greensburg office of our hospice in South Central Indiana. We are one of, if not the oldest hospice in the state. We service 16 counties in the southeastern part of Indiana. I'm mostly Greensburg, Shelbyville, Rushville, so southeast Indianapolis, home to Interstate 74. And have just completely fallen in love with it and can't imagine doing anything else.
I wanna say something about the church memorial, the mismatch, and that there being life after after that. I appreciate that statement so very much. My second pastorate was a federated church, ABC and PCUSA, and it it didn't work. It was not a good fit for me. I had the honor of being the campus chaplain for the small work college that was there in Illinois, and that was my favorite part. Was hanging out with the college kids, but the church part, it wasn't right for me. And I've been here almost 3 years, and I love it, and love all the different ways I get to serve. So I really appreciate that statement, that there's life after, after those places where you don't fit like you had, those hopes, those dreams that you have. There's life after that. You're exactly right. So you love, yeah, yeah, it does.
It does happen, and it's that whole process has actually left some connections that help the current position, the current mindset, and the current pastor there seems to be doing a great job. So.
Yeah. And she's been a guest on my show, so there's your 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or of Ministry Mondays with Meg. Pastor Christy has been was actually my second guest on my show. So there we go for those of you who when we make the trivia game or what have you. So as a chaplain, as a hospice chaplain, now do you go to people's homes, or is there a hospice house there? How does that work?
There's a lot of misconceptions about that, and that may be a good thing to bring up as part of this. Medicare defines hospice as home-based comfort care instead of aggressive treatment. Home can be your house, it can be a nursing home, and so we're in almost every nursing home in these 16 counties. We have a lot of patients in homes. We do have an inpatient center, which of course you're very familiar with. It's a fairly small place. We only use the bottom floor. The top floor is administrative offices.
Okay.
It's 14 beds, but it's there for extreme symptoms that can't be managed at home, nausea, anxiety, pain, where you just need more attention than you can give at home. Because we're medical care, we're not 24/7 personal care. We take the place of the ER and the doctor's office. We don't take the place of the person changing the briefs. That's still up to the family or the nursing home.
Sure.
We can supplement it, but we can't take care of that 24/7. And then that facility is also when a family at home just needs a break. Because of illness, because of exhaustion, because there's some family things going on, you just need a break for a little while. The patient can come in and spend a few days there. So it's kind of a hybrid model, strength of the model, and I think this is important for church life as well. It's a team-based model. In fact, part of why we're recording this when we are, just got off of one of those interdisciplinary team meetings with nurses, the doctor, the social worker, all reviewing patient cases because we all work hand in hand with a team approach, and I think that has a lot to teach church as well. We focus on the pastor doing it all. Well, there's some people the pastor clashes with. Some pastors are better business administrators and speakers than they are hands-on. It takes a team approach of all of us using our unique perspectives and giftedness together, and you can tell I don't preach enough because I'm using my hands.
I have the same problem. I have the same problem. In my CPE, that was one of the things. The nun that was running the program tried to teach me was she would make me sit on my hands, but I'm sorry, Sister Barbara, it never caught on. That is another part of my love and appreciation of chaplains is in my CPE. I was at part of my chaplaincy was at the hospice house at St. Vincent in Indianapolis. So, boy, was that an experience. Because you had the hospice house, you had the women's hospital and things like that. And, part of that defining what a chaplain is and what a chaplain does, I think, is really, really important. Like there's that, at least for some, you'd get called, to a code, you'd get called to somebody who was actively dying kind of thing. And in some cases, from the family, there's that whole, but you have to, like save their soul kind of thing. And that's not what a chaplain does. And so maybe you could give us a little, rundown on.
One of the frustrations, particularly if the family member's approach to spirituality does not match the patient's.
Mm-hmm.
I talked with one lady who was the patient's significant other, kind of, and she was from one of those traditions where it's easy to lose your salvation if you're not good enough, if you do things wrong. She was, in her mind, he had not said the right words, been a member of the right church. She was concerned he wasn't saved, wasn't going anywhere. And at this point, the patient had a bad experience in another facility with a different hospice and had been just in pain and in misery. He was crying out, "Lord Jesus, help me, take me now."
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, well, right now he's kind of out of it because the pain medicines have kicked in. It's working. He's taking a nap because he hasn't been able to sleep in days. But if he's crying out, "Lord Jesus, help me, take me now," he is not scared of death and dying. He's not scared of God. He's comfortable in his spirituality. So that I'm taking that as a sign that, as far as he's concerned, he's good with God.
Yeah.
And I would call that being at peace and being saved and ready to go, and those kind of things you come up with a lot with dementia patients. Patient hadn't gone to church since he was a kid. Is he saved? Is he going to heaven? Like I can't tell you what he thinks, but I know that he's known for not wanting anybody to be around, not being bothered. But if I do a 2-minute prayer, he looks up and says amen and thank you. So he's at peace. So he's good with where he's at. You may not be, but he's
Right.
good with where he's at. So it takes some re-education, bringing gently, because you don't want to challenge someone's lifelong convictions. As you say, that's not the job. I'm not converting the family member either. Um, but you can say, this is where I see signs of grace and trust and faith, where it's not necessarily the black and white, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this, maybe a little closer to the thief on the cross.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. What do you do with all that grief? I mean, you're surrounded day in and day out with grief. What do you?
Um, and that is probably the question I get the most, is how do you do that all the time? You look for the grace, you
Mhm.
look for the healing. Um, had patients from churches who were really into faith healing ask, not
Mm.
patients, family members of patients, we've been praying for healing. Why isn't God healing this person? It's like they're in a body that's racked with Parkinson's or Huntington's or cancer. They've got a brain that's, notice I didn't say mind, brain that's racked with dementia, Alzheimer's. Release and freedom from that is a form of healing,
Mhm.
and greater healing than just fixing the body to go back and do it all again would be. So you look for those signs of healing. You encourage the family to share favorite stories, memories. You get their healing process going, and in that process, you discover some things yourself. So you work on those kinds of healing that don't always involve curing. Curing is one very specific part of healing. What we do in hospice is all of the rest of it. And you rejoice when it does happen. There are times. My very first hospice visit was at a retirement center in Columbus, ironically around the corner from where I live now. Um, the nurse case manager and I were going in to tell a 101-year-old lady we were going to have to discharge her because she was getting better. Yeah, you simplify the medicines. The doctors were convinced she wasn't going to survive the episode that she had had. But then, the nurse mentioned the word hospice. She said, "Hospice, isn't that for people who are dying?" Like, well, yeah. She's like, "Well, no, I don't need that." Like, no, you don't. So, it does happen. We discharge people who are, and sometimes it's as simple as getting rid of a bunch of medicines they don't need.
Yeah.
That brings enough energy back that they've got a few more good months or years, and they can always come back later. It's not not that kind of thing. But and then we take time to grieve ourselves. Um, Part of what our office does with that staff meeting in the morning, um, we rely on the Emily Dickinson poem that says, "Hope is a thing with feathers perched in the soul."
Mm.
We share our memories of patients and remember them as part of our patient review meeting. So we make it an intentional part of what we do. And we recognize it's not for everyone. It can be a lot of grief. And you hate to say it's easy to get too wrapped up in the patients and their lives and their families. You want it to be special and personal, and that's what this hospice organization is, a not-for-profit, one of the few around. So we have that freedom to get a little more personal. Um, but there's times when you have to keep that professional step back. You join in the grief, you cry with the family, but then you work on rejoicing and sending them on. I shouldn't say it that way, because we still go with them through the journey. We have a bereavement specialist that um, makes phone calls, sends mailings. We offer support groups, whether or not the patient or family member had anything to do with our services. So we keep that support going after the patient has passed, and that kind of helps us as well.
The hardest ones for me were the kids. Um,
Yeah.
like cancer units shouldn't exist for anyone, but especially for kids. And, because one, I was a mom with kids at home too, and you just shouldn't. No one should ever have to
And actually, there are a lot of,
be there.
especially the for-profit, but there's a lot of hospices that don't take pediatric patients because they're not equipped for it, and the rules are very different. Um, Somebody who's 18 or under can receive hospice care while receiving other care, chemo, radiation, dialysis, whatever. Um, Becomes a little complicated for us because none of the area children's hospitals are in our 16 county licensed area. So if they have to have a hospital stay, we have to discharge them and readmit them. But we have good relationships with the children's hospitals in Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Louisville, and that brings a whole different set of family dynamics. Part of why our team approach is good is that you can reach out to the entire family system. Are there other children in the home? Are there other illnesses? Are there other losses? Financial issues, navigating all the social services? We can minister to the whole system. We're not just providing medical care for one person.
So, do you have a typical week in a life of ministry for you? I mean,
Oh my
I
goodness.
ask this being facetious, of course, but I'm gonna, but I ask it anyway, just
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
no.
There there are typical visits. There's not a typical day, because like I've had to tell families, I know your mother loved me to death, but I can't do her funeral because you scheduled it on a work day, and I could clear the time, but I have to be available if there's an emergency somewhere. Patient in a crisis, patient passes away. Um, so the bulk of what I do is play it by ear, which my psych profiles all say I'm great at. I am the classic ENFP squirrel. Um,
That's why we get along. Me too.
a typical visit now, and a significant percentage of my patients are dementia patients.
Okay.
Um, and notice I didn't say Alzheimer's
Yeah.
because every different type of dementia acts differently, and even within that, they act differently. I highly recommend the resources from Teepa Snow, Teepa. She does a world of deep stuff on dementia and different ways to relate to where different patients are. Um, so a significant part of what I do is seeing the old rugged cross with little old ladies. But that helps them reconnect with their church and their faith, especially if they're reliving their childhood. Because a lot of dementias, you're not just remembering, you are reliving
Yeah.
real life where you are now, and it can be a connection back with their faith and their childhood and their family and family memories. I've had patients who were active in everything about church until they got sick and had to go to the nursing home, so they can reconnect with some of that. You get some that are just down and depressed because they can't do all the stuff they used to do. You sing a song about heaven and they light up because they know they're going to be free. But we,
So, so your life is really playing it by ear, is it?
oh yes, yes, and there'll be some that they've told you for months they're very confident about everything, nothing's wrong, and then all of a sudden here comes an issue they never dealt with. Um, so and I'm going to get ahead of myself here because this was the one I was going to answer your question with.
No, go ahead.
Um, the one that has become a defining moment for me in this ministry was a dementia patient, and you never knew what you were going to get when you came in there. Some days she would be in the mood for old hymns, some Bible reading and prayer. Some days she just wanted to talk. Some days she wanted to be left alone. It was in a facility. All of her family were out of state. Um, she all of a sudden started talking about her father beating up her mother and how guilty she felt that she didn't do anything to stop it. And in one of those moments that could only be described as divine inspiration, because I ain't that smart, I looked at her and said, "How old were you?" And she said, "Oh, 5 or 6." Like, I looked at her and said, "What's a 6-year-old little girl gonna do to stop a fully grown man from hurting someone?" And her eyes got big, and she said, "I've never thought of it that way before." And we processed that a little bit more, and after we prayed, I was walking out the door. Here's where the grief comes in. She said to me, "Thank you. You've helped more than you will ever know." Those were her last words to me. She found her peace, turned the corner the next week. So that's where you find the healing and release in the midst of the grief and suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a gift she gave you, and didn't even know, and you did the same for her, and and she didn't even know that all this time has passed now, and you hold on to that.
Yeah, because like I say, that's helped me put the frame, and I hadn't been full-time long at that point. So that's kind of helped me frame what I do and how I understand what I do.
What a gift, really. Because not everybody can do that work that you're doing. I mean,
I've had pastors, successful church pastors, look at me and say, "I'm so glad you're there." Or in a couple of the communities I serve, that you'll even though I'm Protestant, the Catholic priests are very glad I'm there because they've got too many people to take care of. They can't go from person to person to person all the time. So I can, so it's a partnership.
Yeah, it is. But when you're the Protestant and you're called to the Catholic's room right after death, that's a problem. Yeah,
Part of what we do is, we even the ones who decline my services, the admission paperwork has a spot where they can mark their faith affiliation. If it's marked Catholic, I make sure the nurse is aware, like, when things start moving, we need to offer to call the priest.
Yes.
And then the priest will come in and do the official sacramental rite, and I'll do everything else.
When I was the on-call, I got called to I was in St. Vincent, so we had a lot of Catholic patients, and here I am, Protestant, and I walk in the room, and he's already passed, and his wife looks at me and says, "You're not Catholic, are you?" I'm like, "No, I'm not." And she's like, "Are you ordained?" Well, I'm licensed, but that's different in the American Baptist tradition than what it means to you. And she's like, "Well, here's the thing. We need to get him to the Blessed Mother." And I'm going, "I don't know. I'd already called the priest, and he's like, "But if he's already passed, there's nothing I can do." And this poor woman looks at me and just says, "Do you think you could just get him on his way get him started to the Blessed Mother, and I'll do the rest?" And you're going, Oh, but I was like, I can pray. I can pray. We can do that. But and then I, we prayed, and then I called the priest anyway,
Yeah.
who was not very happy. But yeah, you walk into all kinds of situations, and um yeah, that one's one I'll never forget because I couldn't get this guy to the Blessed Mother, you know.
Yeah.
And but she wasn't upset with me either. Um
Well, I find folks that are amazed that I know a Hail Mary.
oh, yeah. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
one of the fun ones in town, um, and the patient wasn't as close to the end as he thought, but he was Hispanic, didn't speak any English,
Oh.
hadn't been to church in years. So instead of calling the church, they called us. Um, so they said it wasn't an emergency thing. They just said, "Can you come sometime today?" So I pulled up YouTube, listened to Hail Mary and Our Father in Spanish long enough I could type it out and read it in Spanish, um, so I could go meet him where he was. And then you go from this guy who's staring at his son, who was doing a great job of interpreting, by the way, to all of a sudden mouthing along when he heard words he recognized. And he hadn't been to church since he was a kid.
Yeah.
But
See,
that was exactly what he needed at that moment.
which is what ministry is all about, is meeting people where they are. And so,
Another favorite was my witch.
oh, you had a witch.
Yeah, yeah. I think she was trying to play it up for shock value, but that was the way she described herself. Um, and so, of course, I look at her and say, well, teach me about your faith and your beliefs. Well, she was really into nature-based things, so more pagan than anything else.
Okay.
She really appreciated Native American traditions, very earth connected. So I went to the little bookstore on the square in Shelbyville,
Mhm.
um, and said, "This is what I got going on. What can you find me?" So they found me it's Three Sisters Books and Gifts. If you happen to be in Indiana anytime, great coffee. Um, they got me a book of Native American wisdom, and they said there's not a lot about pagan spirituality, but most of what we found recommended Mary Oliver poetry. So here's a book of Mary Oliver poetry. So I took those in, and she was thrilled.
Mm.
And actually, her last words to me were, "There's my pagan friend." Because
Mm.
I had taken time to listen to where she was at, and
Oh,
she still had a very deep spirituality, just not in Christian terminology.
yeah, yeah. One that I found that helped was The Next Place. It's written more as a kid book,
Hmm.
but it's helpful for adults too, because it doesn't specifically, like, it doesn't name God, but the next place you'll go, there's never a Monday. And I've used it in funerals, and I've used it in hospice situations, and um, and it is just a short book, but never a good day, never a bad, that kind of thing, and doesn't, like I said, doesn't specifically name God, but for those of you people who are faith-based people, you could certainly find God in there. So um, I will make sure that at the bottom of our broadcast that I put in here the Teepa Snow, so that people can look for that as a resource for dementia.
And
And
I can't remember the name of her organization, but if you look up Teepa Snow, TEEPA, she's everywhere. She's got Facebook pages. She's got a website.
sure,
They were selling all of the books through the website, but now they're beginning to do it through Amazon, so it's a lot more accessible.
sure,
She's got some video cast and podcast kind of things. A lot of it is geared toward professionals, but there's a lot of resources there for family members sitting at home dealing with dementia for the first time and no idea what to do.
Oh, that's great. No, yeah, well, I'll put it below the video so that people can find that, and I'll find the website and put a link there too. Um, so as we kind of wrap up and things like that, the joy question,
Mm-hmm.
ta-da, um, everything that you do, ministry, being a husband, all those things. You can answer this however you want. In everything that you do, what brings you joy?
Um, Helping people find those connections
Hmm.
to grace, to healing, to peace, to a piece of the part of themselves they thought they had lost. You know, um, I get my share of folks who went to church as a kid or had some sort of faith connection, but there was some reason there was a falling out,
Hmm.
um, or who went to a church that they knew they didn't agree with, and this was not where their spirituality was, but didn't realize that yeah, there are other forms of Christianity, there are other forms of spirituality, connections, finding support systems. I mentioned the little bookstore in Shelbyville. You'd be surprised how many times sitting there at the counter and family members of patients come through, or we'll get a referral to a patient. It's like, I know you. I saw you at the bookstore. You know, but those connections to community that really are, to me, what church is about. Um, I'm one of those. I don't know if deconstruction is the right word for my experience, but I have found more church outside of the institution than I have within it, and it's those connectedness, the community, but helping people find support and grace and healing. Regardless of whether I'm on the clock or not, regardless of where I'm at, what kind of background they've got, just making that connection that gives them some some comfort and peace from knowing that there is something more than they have imagined before.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. Um, well, I am grateful for you, for your ministry, for giving of your time to do this. We'll also I'll put out a little shout out and below the video as well for your bookstore. Because why not? Um, why not? And I do appreciate you, your time, your ministry, giving of yourself to others, and the sacrifice, because you know give of yourself freely, to do this, and to be a part of someone's life, even if it is in the end, and you find beauty and meaning in a life regardless of their faith tradition. So, for you and your work and your ministry, and those who do the same, I am grateful. I'm grateful. So, and we thank everyone for watching us, and for ABHMS for allowing me to get on the internet and ramble with people and have great and wonderful conversations about ministry. You can catch us on Facebook, ABHMS, Judson Press, and we'll be on YouTube, Ministry Life. We're around. You can Google us. Um, Episodes drop on Mondays at 11 a.m. And we thank everyone for watching.